We have already learned about the civilizations in Mesoamerica and South America, so today we'll be looking at the civilizations in North America and the Caribbean before their discovery by Christopher Columbus. As you can see on the map on the screen, there are many tribes in North America. Unlike in Mesoamerica or South America, none of these civilizations ever became an empire. In the eastern portion of what would become the United States and Canada, the tribes are either sedentary or semi-sedentary, and by 1491 they had become agriculturalists. Two examples of these societies are the Iroquois Confederacy and the Wampanoag. The Iroquois Confederacy are located in modern-day upstate New York, and they were sedentary, although they did move every 10 years to allow their fields to go fallow. The Wampanoag are located in modern-day Massachusetts and were semi-sedentary peoples. The Wampanoag were the peoples that the Pilgrims first encountered and with whom they had the first Thanksgiving. In the western portion of what would become the United States and Canada, the tribes were mostly nomadic and hunter-gatherers, the exception being some civilizations in the southwest like the Hopi or the Pueblo. Two examples of nomadic tribes are the Lakota along the modern-day border of the U.S. and Canada, and the Apache who ranged across the Great Plains. The names we are using and still used for tribes are not the names that they gave themselves, but rather the names that were given to them by Europeans, or sometimes their enemies who happened to encounter the Europeans first. The names of these tribes often translates to the people in their native language, much like Tjalagi, which you can see up in the right corner of the screen, and this is written in the Cherokee alphabet. Tjalagi means the people, and it is the proper name for the Cherokee. Another example is the Dene for the Navajo and the Apache. An instance of an enemy naming a tribe can be seen with the Apache, who translates from the Yavapai language to mean enemy, although that's really only the polite way to say what the word Apache really means. Sometimes tribes were named for the language groups they spoke, like the most often misused Sioux. Sioux is a language spoken by the Lakota or sometimes Dakota peoples. It's not a tribe. The Native Americans or Amerindians. These are really the only two terms you can use. In WHAP, we do not call the people that live in North America Indians because, we talk about India in this class. Now, the Native Americans did not have metallurgy technology, so they still used stone tools in their everyday life and in their weaponry. This did cause them a disadvantage once the Europeans arrived, since they did not have guns. However, the Native Americans were far more accurate with their bows and arrows than the Europeans with their guns. Eventually, after the discovery of North America by the Europeans, the Native Americans would adopt the use of iron metallurgy. For the tribes that were agriculturalists, the three most important crops were called the three sister crops: beans, maize or corn, and squash. These crops were planted together to best aid growth. The climbing beans would use the corn stalks to grow taller, and the corn leaves would shade the squash from the sun, and the squash would give nutrients to both the corn and the beans. Through extensive research into the genetics of the maize used in the 1400s, you can see pictures of that maize on the screen. Scientists have been able to learn that the Native Americans genetically manipulated the maize varieties they used to get the hardiest and most productive maize plant. There is this idea that persists still to this day that when Europeans reached the New World, that they were entering a world that had been untouched by the Native Americans. This is simply not the case. The Native Americans would clear forests to plant their fields, as well as clear parts of forests to aid them in hunting. They manipulate their environment, but they did so without the mass deforestation that we would see happening in Europe around the same time. Many Native American societies were at least partly matriarchal, and many were matrilineal. These tribes believed that women had an important role to play in politics, so that it was possible to have a female war chief or leader, such as Weetamoo from the Wampanoag tribe. An Iroquois would describe the importance of women this way: In our society, women are the center of all things. Nature, we believe, has given women the ability to create. Therefore, it is only natural that women be in positions of power to protect this function. Now, this would be one of the things that really confused the Europeans when they showed up. Because, as you know, Europe was a patriarchal society. In the colonial Americas, occasionally there were times when Native Americans would raid and capture European women. And one thing that we saw most often after this is if the European women stayed with the tribe for a while and was not rescued immediately, they had a reluctance to return back to their European society. Because even though life was hard and they had to work hard every day, their position as a woman was more valued in the Native American tribe than it was in the society that they had grown up in. While Native American societies were stratified in that there were chiefs often chosen because of their ability, but sometimes due to family lineage, the tribes were mostly egalitarian in nature. Work was often divided based on gender. Men hunted, women farmed, but both played a role in providing for the tribe. It was this division of labor that would stump the Europeans on arrival, as women in Europe did not farm. Another aspect of Native American life that confused Europeans was that Native Americans did not own property in a European sense, but rather they believed that the land should be used but could not be owned. One thing that was unique about the societies in North America was the presence of people considered two spirits. Many Native American tribes recognized four genders. Masculine men and feminine women are the first two. These are the genders that most people recognize as standard genders, right? But they also recognized a third and a fourth gender, feminine men and masculine women. These third and fourth genders, embodied by the two spirits, included performing work and wearing clothing associated with both men and women. Two spirits have been documented in over 130 North American tribes in every region of the continent. So even now, in the 21st century, we have a hard time acknowledging that gender is different from biological sex. The majority of Native Americans in the 1400s acknowledged that fact to be true. The first Native American tribes to encounter Europeans were located on islands in the Caribbean Sea, and they first encountered the Spanish with the voyages of Christopher Columbus. The Taino were the tribe that lived on the island that Columbus named Hispaniola, or modern-day Dominican Republic and Haiti. The Taino also lived on the modern-day islands of Jamaica, Puerto Rico, and Cuba. The Taino name for the mountainous side of Hispaniola was Haiti, which lends Haiti its name. The Taino were divided up into many chiefdoms, each led by a cacique, to whom tribute was paid. When the Spanish arrived, they did not bring any women, so when they stayed on the island, they ended up taking Taino women as common-law wives, resulting in mestizo children. But we will discuss this more in the next lecture. After the first encounters with the Spanish, the Taino population declined, and within 30 years, 80 to 90% of the Taino had died. By 1548, the Taino population had declined to fewer than 500. Population estimates range from a few 100,000 to 8 million. I would hazard that their population probably was somewhere in the millions range due to the amount of the Caribbean that Taino resided in. The Taino culture has been declared extinct by anthropologists and historians. However, recent genetic research indicates that on the low end, 60% of the Puerto Rican population has Native American DNA, and the majority of those are believed to be of Taino descent. While the culture may be extinct, the influence of the Taino does live on in the language that we still speak. Many Taino words were adopted by the Spanish and thus moved into the English language. Some examples include hamaca, or hammock, canoa, or canoe, hurricane, and probably most importantly for those of us in Texas, barbacoa, or barbecue. As you've read about already, the Columbian Exchange details the transfer of food, ideas, and disease between the Eastern and Western Hemisphere. We're going to look more closely at the disease transfer of the Columbian Exchange and the impact it had on the Native Americans. It is difficult to determine the exact population of the pre-Columbian Americas, but a general consensus number is around 50 million. However, estimates can range up to 100 million. What is known is that due to the introduction of diseases that the Native Americans had no immunity to, as well as starvation, war, and essentially slavery, led to a drastic decline in the Native American population. The three most deadly diseases introduced were smallpox, measles, and influenza. Smallpox has a vaccine, as does the measles and the influenza. Smallpox has been eradicated, declared, and endorsed by the WHO in 1980. But as you know, measles and influenza, they're still around. Children in the U.S. get measles vaccinations. However, there have been increased outbreaks of the measles. And as you know right now, there's been a really virulent influenza strain going around. So even though we're not really concerned about smallpox so much anymore, measles and influenza still do have the potential to kill people. And sadly, still are killing people. A common word used to describe what happened to the Native Americans after European encounters is decimation. But that word isn't quite correct, since that indicates that only 1 out of 10 people died, which was not the case for the Americas. The current estimate is that ultimately 80% of the Native American population would die off due to European contact. One of the main problems in discussing the history of the Native Americans, especially those in North America, is that they did not have written records that are easily decipherable by historians, as well as the destruction of their societies and cultures by Europeans. Many new advancements in historical thought about the Native Americans have emerged since the 1960s. However, the thought that these societies were uncivilized still persists. When the Europeans encountered the Native Americans, they stumbled upon a culture that was vastly different from their culture. However, being different does not denote that the Native Americans were uncivilized. It's hard to see the Native Americans as uncivilized when they held that belief that gender is different than sex, something we are still trying to accept in the 21st century. Or to say a society that can make the Nazca lines could be uncivilized. Or people that could carve an entire city into the cliffs could be uncivilized. I think if you look at all the evidence, you'll see that these were not uncivilized societies. They were just different than the Europeans. And even with all that the Native American societies have gone through, they still persevere and they still pass on their culture to the next generation. They are, in the words that they said many, many generations ago, still here.